Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish."
Imagine a young orphaned girl who rose from obscurity to save an entire nation. Her name? Esther. A queen chosen not just for her beauty, but for her courage, her faith, and her destiny. Her story is set in the mighty Persian Empire, a land of grandeur and intrigue, where God's unseen hand worked to preserve his people. But to truly grasp the weight of this story, we must uncover not just Esther's rise, but the web of schemes, betrayals, and triumphs that shaped her journey, and the history that brought her people to this pivotal moment. Our story begins in the reign of King Xerxes, a ruler whose empire stretched across 127 provinces, from India to Kush. Known for his immense wealth and extravagant lifestyle, Xerxes hosted a grand feast to display his splendor. But his pride led to trouble when he commanded his queen, Vashti, to appear before his drunken guests to display her beauty. "I will not degrade myself for their entertainment." Vashti's refusal enraged Xerxes, who consulted his advisors. They urged him to remove her as queen, fearing that her defiance would inspire rebellion among women in the empire. The king agreed. A decree was sent out, and the search for a new queen began. Meanwhile, in the city of Susa, lived a young Jewish woman named Esther. Orphaned at a young age, she had been raised by her cousin Modecai, a wise and devout Jew who served at the king's gate. When the decree reached their home, Modecai encouraged Esther to participate, sensing that God might have a greater purpose for her. "Esther, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not reveal your heritage, but know that God will guide you." Esther was brought to the palace along with many other young women. Her grace, humility, and beauty quickly set her apart. She won favor with Haggai, the royal eunuch, who gave her special treatment and the best accommodations. When it was her turn to meet the king, Xerxes was captivated. "Esther, you are unlike anyone I have ever known. You shall be my queen." Esther's rise to royalty was not by chance. It was God's unseen hand preparing her for a far greater purpose. But while Esther adjusted to life as queen, the seeds of a deadly plot were already being sown. One day, while sitting at the king's gate, Modecai overheard a plot by 2 of the king's officers, Bigthana and Teresh. These men were angry with Xerxes and planned to assassinate him. "Tomorrow we strike. The king won't see it coming. We'll finally have our revenge." Modecai immediately reported the plot to Esther, who informed the king, giving credit to Modecai. The plot was investigated, the conspirators were executed, and the event was recorded in the royal chronicles. Yet, Modecai received no reward, at least not yet. To understand the conflict in this story, we must meet Haman, a man consumed by pride and hatred. Haman was an Agagite, a descendant of the Amalekites, ancient enemies of the Jewish people. The Amalekites had a long history of enmity with Israel. In Exodus 17, they attacked the Israelites as they journeyed through the wilderness. God declared that their name would be blotted out. Generations later, King Saul failed to fully carry out God's command to destroy the Amalekites, leaving a legacy of bitterness that Haman embodied. Haman demanded that all bow before him, but Modecai refused, declaring that he would bow only to God. "Who is this man who dares defy me? He shall repay. And not just him, all his people will perish." Fueled by his hatred, Haman devised a plan to annihilate all Jews in the Persian Empire. He approached the king with a cunning lie. "There is a certain people scattered throughout your empire. They keep their own laws and refuse to obey yours. They are a threat to your kingdom. Let a decree be written to destroy them, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury." Xerxes, trusting Haman, handed over his signet ring, giving him full authority. The decree was sent out, and panic spread among the Jews. But why were the Jews in Persia to begin with? To answer that, we must rewind the clock. The Jewish people, once a mighty nation under King David and Solomon, had turned away from God. Their disobedience led to their downfall. In 586 BC, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians, and many Jews were exiled to foreign lands. For decades, they lived as captives, strangers in a strange land. Then the Persian Empire rose to power, conquering Babylon. King Cyrus of Persia allowed some Jews to return to rebuild their temple, but many chose to stay in Persia. It is here, in this foreign land, that the story of Esther unfolds, a story of redemption for a people who had suffered so much. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned publicly. He sent a message to Esther, urging her to intercede with the king. Do not think that, because you are in the palace, you will escape. If you remain silent, deliverance will come from another place, but you and your family will perish. Who knows if you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? I could die if I go to the king uninvited, but if I stay silent, my people will perish. I must act. Tell Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Susa to fast for me for 3 days. My maids and I will do the same. After that, I will go to the king. If I perish, I perish. That night the king couldn't sleep. He ordered the royal chronicles to be read to him, and the account of Mordecai's act of loyalty was brought to his attention. What honor has been given to Mordecai for saving my life? None, my lord. The next morning, Haman arrived to request Mordecai's execution, but before he could speak, the king asked him a question. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? For the man the king delights to honor, let him wear the king's robe, ride the king's horse, and be led through the city by a noble official. Excellent! Go at once and do all this for Mordecai the Jew. After 3 days of fasting and prayer, Esther stepped into the king's presence. The court fell silent. Would he extend his golden scepter, or would she face certain death? The king welcomed her, but Esther didn't immediately reveal her request. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet, and then another. Esther was waiting for the perfect moment. My king, if I have found favor with you, grant me my life and spare my people, for we have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. Who would do such a thing? The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman. The king, enraged, ordered Haman to be hanged on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. But the decree against the Jews still stood, as Persian law could not be revoked. Instead, the king issued a new decree, allowing the Jews to defend themselves. On the appointed day, they triumphed over their enemies, and the day of sorrow turned into a day of celebration. The victory was commemorated with the Feast of Purim, a yearly celebration of God's deliverance through Esther and Mordecai. Their story reminds us that even when God seems silent, He is always working behind the scenes for His people. Esther's courage, Mordecai's faith, and God's providence remind us that we are placed where we are for a reason. Like Esther, we are called to rise to the moment. Who knows? Perhaps you too were born for such a time as this? God's sovereignty. Even though the name of God is not mentioned in the book of Esther, His hand is evident throughout. Proverbs 21:1 reminds us, "The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. He directs it like a watercourse wherever He pleases." God works behind the scenes for the good of His people. Courage and faith. Esther's willingness to risk her life for her people reminds us of Jesus' words, "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." Matthew 16:25. The power of fasting and prayer. Esther's 3-day fast highlights the importance of seeking God's guidance and strength in times of crisis. God uses the ordinary. Esther was an orphan and a foreigner, yet God used her to save an entire nation. he often uses the unlikely to fulfill his purposes, as seen in 1 Corinthians 1:27. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Please kindly subscribe to Believers World Bible Stories for more intriguing and inspiring biblical stories.